I was having a discussion online today about the merits of modular character design. By which I mean that whenever a character advances, there's always going to be like lots of discrete packets of options for the player to choose from. Most commonly known example, I think, today is in Pathfinder 2. Basically, every class feature is a feat. And then there's also a lot of feats that are not tied to a class. But basically, every time you level up, you're going to get a feat of some sort. And because all features are sort of boiled down into these feats, you can have lists of them to choose from. So there's always a variety of choices when you level up. And they can be sort of directly compared to each other in the context of when you level up, this is the packet of mechanics that you can incorporate into your character. This sort of modular game design is good for two main reasons. One, obviously, the versatility, the possible versatility of characters improves. Players that have a lot of options can create a lot of different varied characters, and that's good for the variety of the game, the diversity of character options. My voice is still my voice is still doing things today, as you can tell. So bear with me. So it's good for the player because it increases character variety. And it's fun to pick from a list of options. I think that's an aspect of RPGs that most people really enjoy. To sort of like, go grocery shopping for your character's next ability. But it's also good for the designers because it increases the inherent expandability of the system. Now, in a system like D&D or Pathfinder, where it is assumed that you're going to be putting out expansion material, additional options for characters, as both of those franchises do, it's good to have a structure set up in advance that allows you to easily incorporate new content. In 5th edition, there's pretty much the only system set up like that is the spell system. So if you are a spellcaster, you have an inherent means of expanding the character options. New spells. You just decide what level they are and then what the spell does. So this packet, this tiny module of game content, you can just sort of throw in and like, here's the rules for incorporating into your character. It's very easy. Anyone who doesn't cast spells, or if you want a feature other than spellcasting, it's going to either be a subclass, which is a lot more work. It's a significantly larger piece of content, which means it's harder to design, and it's more, I don't think exclusionary is the wrong word, but basically like the opportunity cost for using that content is much greater. And so it's frankly less likely to see play, less likely to be relevant to most tables. Or there are a few things where it's like, instead of taking this feature, you can have this feature instead. And that sounds fine on the surface, but what it really showcases is that, let's say at level, let's say hypothetically, this is not an actual thing that exists. Let's say hypothetically, the fighter at level 2 gets Action Surge. And then a book comes out that says, hey, instead of taking Action Surge, you can take this feature. Well, that's increasing in modularity, but what it really points out is that in the base class, this module only has one option. Whereas with spellcasters, I'm gonna probably work in the martial caster disparity in every freaking video because it's kind of the hot button topic at the moment. Just for you. You know who you are. So what it points out is that like, oh, at this level, you only had this option. So here's a new option. And cool, more options are better. But why does the fighter only have the one option? You are prescribed this one specific feature and you don't get to choose. Whereas, say, a spellcaster, every time they get new spells, they're like, hey, you get to choose from 30, 40 options. That kind of weird difference really demonstrates why casters are so much more powerful than marshals, because every time you have a choice between different options, you can always take the best choice, whatever that may be in your particular context. Which means that you are getting the best choice at every single opportunity where you choose a new option. So you're going to skyrocket. Now imagine a world where the wizard, instead of getting to choose 3 cantrips, you get 1 cantrip, and it's Firebolt. That's it. At level 2, you get a 2nd cantrip, and it's Prestidigitation. You don't get to pick. You get these specific, prescribed features. And, your first level spell is Magic Missile. That's what you get, and you may cast it once a day. And when you get a 2nd spell, it is prescribed to you. It's going to be, Sleep, which is a good spell. But you can cast that once per day. There's no spell slots because that's too much versatility. These kinds of decisions. So what I'm getting at is that in 5th edition, spellcasters are highly modular classes. Non-casters are not. And so that means that the advantage for both the ability to make versatile characters with the given content very much favors casters, and the ability for the designers to put out expansion content also favors casters. The designers made martial characters very difficult to expand or improve or to put out new content for. Pretty much only is subclasses. And subclasses can only do so much because you only get features at specific levels. They don't generally change the core identity of the class. Whereas, a wizard that takes a very different spell list is going to fundamentally play very differently from a different wizard who takes a more standard spell list. So modularity is very important. And I'm going to get to some of the systems that I like. Because as much as I can praise Pathfinder 2nd Edition for this, it's frankly not a system that I'm that familiar with. I've played relatively little of it. I think we only got to 4th level? Something like that? 3rd or 4th level? It had to be more than 3rd. 4th or 5th. So I don't have as much experience with Pathfinder, so I can't really talk about it with any sort of confidence. But from what I have seen, it does this very well. All classes are very modular, which means that it is easy to customize your character, and it is easy for the designers to put out expansion content for them. This is sort of future-proofing your design. Now, a system that I think also does this quite well, and with which I am far more familiar, is a game like Blades in the Dark, where character abilities are absolutely modular. Because although they are broken up into playbooks, and each playbook has a list of special abilities, you are not limited in any way to the special abilities on your playbook. Their multi-classing system is that when you get a new special ability, you can choose it from any playbook. There's no extra cost. There's no limitation. You don't have to have any special abilities from your playbook. You could have them strictly from other playbooks, as many others ones as you want. Playbooks are differentiated from each other in ways other than with the list of special abilities. So what this means is that all special abilities in Blades in the Dark have to sort of compare themselves to each other, all equally. So what you could do is just have this one long list. There's no prerequisites on anything. They all sort of coexist together, and they are all assumed to be roughly equal in effect. Roughly as powerful and as effectual as all other abilities. Which means that, in theory, now, obviously, there's no such thing as a perfect design. So some abilities are going to be more impactful than others, especially because, different campaigns will emphasize different types of abilities. So in theory, you can take any special ability from the entire list, the entire combined list, and be fine, because they're all equivalent. There's no like low-level abilities or high-level abilities. They're all just abilities. And so as you gain more special abilities, your character naturally becomes more diversified or more specialized as you take abilities that allow you to do what you do better or to do other things that you couldn't previously do very well. Highly modular content. And what that means is that if they wanted to put out an expansion, and there's been some sort of like murmurs and talks, I think there's probably a Kickstarter exclusive one, I want to say on Cerberus, but I could be wrong on that. New playbooks, introducing new special abilities, improves I am still like a little bit there. New playbooks, new special abilities improves the options of existing ones. Automatic modularity. Like, it's so strongly baked into the system, you can't avoid it. Every bit of new content affects all characters because of the modular nature of character building in these games. Many Powered by the Apocalypse games are the same way, where you have either very easy or completely unlimited access to the special abilities of other character types. Most of them are not quite as easy and free as Blades in the Dark. There's usually some sort of limitation. You can only do it so many times or whatever. There's also a game like Fabula Ultima, which takes this concept and actually like codifies it and makes it a fundamental part of the way that characters are built. You have to multi-class. You have to have more than one character class. And every character class is basically just a list of special abilities, 4 or 5, that must all be roughly equivalent to each other. Or sometimes there's like a couple of main special abilities and then ancillary support abilities for those. But they're all meant to interact with and be combined with the abilities of other classes. They're all considered equal. It's highly modular. If the designers wanted to, they put out a new class. That class is a little packet. I mean, it's a relatively large, honestly, it's a relatively large packet of content that is then ready to be immediately grabbed up by players and shoved into the game to be worked in seamlessly. These kinds of modular designs are so good for both the health of the game, if the designers wish to continue to support and expand it, but also they're good for just like the general player experience. Customizability of characters is a huge thing in RPGs. Everyone wants to be able to build the character that they have imagined. But it also, it doesn't sacrifice, I think, in hardly any way, the game's ability to sort of nudge the players towards the desired character fantasy archetypes, which I have talked about in a previous video. And that is something that you want the game to be able to support. You want the game to say, hey, this game is primarily about, or is assumed to be about, these kinds of characters. You can go outside those lines a bit, but the game is, a good RPG should be able to say, let's push you in this direction. Here are some really evocative abilities for this kind of fantasy. And the player can be like, neat. Now I know, no, that is going to inspire me to play that kind of character. Or they can go, neat. I will use that in a different context to make my own character idea. And highly modular design does not interfere with that process. It doesn't necessarily help it, I don't think. Not in any kind of inherent way, but it doesn't interfere with it. Both can exist at the same time. Modular design is very good. When 5th edition was first being developed and it was in playtest under the name D&D Next, there was a lot of talk about making it a modular system where you would have some simple base rules and then a lot of rules modules that would be published in order to, add depth or, change genres or whatever to support different styles of play. And that was lauded. That, including by me. I said, that is a really great idea. Let's do that. And what they ended up doing was just making a system that doesn't really do anything itself. It's so flat and dry, and some of the classes are also so flat and dry and flavorless. But there's no rules modules to enhance it. And a big part of that is because the core system is so simple. It doesn't have any parts for other modules to sort of latch onto. What you would want in a modular game is to have all classes set up with a modular structure. Whereas like at this level, you're going to get, one from this set of abilities. Very much like 4th edition does. 4th edition is an extremely modular system, obviously, because every time you level up, you're either choosing from a huge list of feats or you're choosing from a huge list of powers. Every time you're choosing features from a list, that's modularity. And the lists, depending on the game, long lists, short lists, there are advantages to both. But what I'm getting at is that 5th edition doesn't have any sort of like texture on the base, or has very little texture on the base game for any sort of modulars to latch onto. If let's say 5e has a fatigue system that is incorporated, and the base game is extremely simple. Everyone has 10 fatigue. You may spend 1 fatigue to give yourself +1 on a roll after rolling, and that's it. And the fatigue recovers on a long rest. Extremely simple system, not very effective, but that is a mechanic that you could write an expansion module to sort of latch onto that and say, hey, here's a bunch of other ways to use fatigue. Here are some effects that can happen when your fatigue is high or when it's low or somewhere in between. Here's mechanics that can interact with that system in different ways. The fewer rules, the fewer pieces of rules that you have, the fewer mechanics that you have in the base game, the harder it is to write rules modules for it. So while they said that they were going to write a simple system that is designed to be modular, they didn't do that. They just didn't. 5e is a relatively simple system. For D&D, it's relatively simple. I would say, although I would consider it a medium weight game, it is sort of on the lower end of medium. But it doesn't have any mechanics that support the modularity that the designers said that they were going to be going for. Whether that was a change in their design philosophy, whether they decided to not do the modularity thing, or if they just failed because they didn't know how to do that, I couldn't say. I've heard a lot of conflicting reports about the development of 5th edition, and I do not have any special insight on what may have happened there. But I know that they abandoned, they actually took out, because remember, fighters used to have Battlemaster style features, the maneuvers as baseline. Like the Battlemaster just built on, expanded that. The baseline fighter had maneuvers, and they decided to take that out for reasons that I would call quite political and not very good at justifying what they've done. So they actually made the fighter less modular by removing that. Because, a fighter with baseline maneuvers is inherently modular. You can write new maneuvers and say, hey, here's a new selection of maneuvers. You can use these instead of the ones in the book, or in addition to, or whatever. Whereas, right now, the fighter has a lot of specific features, and you don't get to choose different features when you level up. You have to take those features. Anyways, long-winded, but it's something that I've been thinking about today. Design modularity is very, very good. 5th edition doesn't do it well. Lots of games do it very well. And I think it can easily be done without making the game big and heavy and complicated. So I don't think that is a legitimate concern. That can easily be done. Modularity can be done in a good way without incurring that drawback. So yeah, games should be modular.